The morning my aunt told me I was selfish, I was standing in a lawyer's office holding a paper that proved I had been quietly erased from my own family for years. My name is Linda Harper. I was 34 years old at the time. I lived in a small coastal town in South Carolina, the kind where everyone knows your last name before they know your story. I worked as an operations coordinator for a regional construction firm. Steady job, long hours, good reputation, the kind of life people describe as doing fine when they don't look too closely. My mother had passed away 3 years earlier. Cancer. Fast. Brutal. The kind that doesn't give you time to say everything you should have said. My father followed her less than a year later. A heart attack in his sleep. Sudden, quiet, final. After that, what was left of my family reorganized itself without me. At least that's what I learned later. That morning I was at the attorney's office because my cousin Mark had called the week before, his voice oddly cheerful. "We're finally settling everything," he said. "The estate, paperwork stuff. You should come in." He said it like a courtesy, like I was an afterthought he remembered at the last minute. The attorney was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a desk too clean for comfort. He slid a folder toward me and adjusted his glasses. "I assume you've reviewed the trust," he asked. I blinked. "What trust?" He paused. "Just long enough?" "The Harper Family Trust," he said carefully. "Established after your mother's death." My stomach tightened. "No one mentioned a trust," I said. He frowned and flipped through the folder. "That's unusual." He turned the document toward me. There it was. My father's name, my Aunt Carol's name, my cousin Mark's name, and conspicuously absent, mine. I leaned back in the chair, my pulse pounding in my ears. "I'm his daughter," I said. "Why am I not listed?" The attorney hesitated. "According to these documents, your father designated your aunt as executor and primary beneficiary." I felt cold spread through my chest. "That's not possible," I said. "My father would never." "He signed this," the attorney said gently, "about 6 months after your mother passed." 6 months. I remembered that time vividly. My father barely functioning, my aunt moving in to help, me flying back and forth from job sites to doctor's appointments, sleeping in spare rooms, paying bills. "Did he amend it later?" I asked. The attorney shook his head. "No." My throat burned, and my cousin, he was added as secondary beneficiary. I laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "So I get nothing." The attorney shifted. "You're not excluded explicitly. You're simply not included. There's a difference, and it hurts more." I walked out of that office, numb, the salt air from the harbor doing nothing to clear my head. I called my aunt from the parking lot. She answered on the second ring. "Oh, good you went," she said brightly. "We were worried you'd make a fuss." "A fuss about what?" I asked. "The trust," she replied. "Your father wanted it simple. Simple for who I asked." She sighed. "Linda, you live your own life. Mark stayed. He helped." I swallowed hard. "I paid Dad's medical bills. I handled his insurance. I flew in every month." "Yes," she said impatiently, "but you weren't here every day." There it was. Presence rewritten as proximity. "So you cut me out," I said. "We did what your father wanted," she replied, "and frankly, you don't need it." That sentence landed harder than anything else. Because it wasn't about money. It was about permission. They had decided my independence disqualified me from belonging. I hung up without saying goodbye. That night I sat alone in my apartment listening to the hum of traffic outside and opened the box of documents my father had left behind. Insurance papers, old receipts, a yellowed envelope labeled boat. Inside it was a handwritten note. "Linda, if anything ever happens, don't trust anyone who rushes you. Read everything." My hands shook because suddenly the story didn't feel finished. It felt staged, and I was no longer willing to play the role they had written for me. Not when the truth was still sitting quietly waiting to be read. I didn't go home after leaving the lawyer's office. I drove aimlessly along the coast windows down, letting the salty air sting my eyes until I couldn't tell whether the moisture there came from wind or something else. Every memory I had of my father replayed itself out of order. His laugh, the way he tapped the table when he was thinking, the look on his face the night my mother died when he said nothing at all and just sat there staring at his hands. That man would not have erased me, not knowingly. When I finally parked outside my apartment, it was nearly dark. I didn't turn on the lights right away. I sat on the edge of my couch with the box of my father's papers open in front of me, the one I'd brought back from his house after the funeral and never fully unpacked. At the time, it felt too raw, too final. Now it felt necessary. I went through everything slowly. Utility bills, old tax returns, warranty cards, a stack of unopened mail my aunt had insisted was probably junk. It wasn't. One envelope caught my eye. Thin, official. Addressed to my father, postmarked from Charleston, dated just weeks after my mother's death. Inside was a notice from a regional bank. "Trust documents enclosed." My chest tightened. There were copies of signatures, dates, and a return receipt confirming delivery. Someone had received these documents, someone other than me. I checked the date again. My father had been hospitalized that week. Dehydration, exhaustion, grief. I had been the one coordinating his care from 2 counties away while my aunt stayed in the house to help. Help! I pulled out my laptop and started building a timeline. Mother's death. Aunt Carol moves in. Father's hospitalization. Trust established. Me excluded. Patterns don't lie. People do. The next morning, I called the bank listed on the notice. After 3 transfers and 1 polite dismissal, I reached a woman in records. "I'm calling about documents sent to my father," I said carefully, "regarding a trust." "Are you an authorized party?" she asked. "I'm his daughter," I replied. A pause, keys clicking. "Those documents were signed in person," she said. "In person," I repeated. "Where?" "At our satellite office," she replied. "Your aunt accompanied him." The room felt suddenly too small. "And his condition?" I asked. "I'm sorry," she said. "We don't discuss health information. But I can tell you this wasn't done electronically." I thanked her and hung up. My hands were shaking now. That afternoon, I drove to my aunt's house. I didn't call ahead. She answered the door with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Linda," she said, "this isn't a good time." "I won't take long," I replied, stepping inside before she could stop me. The living room smelled like lemon cleaner and control. Everything was spotless, staged. "Did you take Dad to the bank after Mom died?" I asked. Her smile vanished. "You're upsetting yourself," she said. "You should let this go." "Did you?" I repeated. She crossed her arms. "Your father wanted things settled. He was overwhelmed." "So you decided for him," I said. "I helped him," she snapped. "Someone had to." "Did he know I wasn't included?" I asked. Silence. That was answer enough. "You were busy," she said finally. "Your career, your life. Mark was here. He deserved security." "And I didn't," I asked. Her expression hardened. "You didn't need it." That sentence again. As if need were the price of love. I laughed softly. "You thought I wouldn't check." She scoffed. "What are you going to do, sue your family?" "I'm going to find out the truth," I said. "And then I'm going to act on it." She stepped closer. "You'll tear this family apart." I met her gaze. "You already did." I left before she could respond. That night, I emailed the attorney. I asked one question. Was there any evidence my father was legally competent when the trust was signed? His reply came an hour later. "That depends, but undue influence is a serious concern." I stared at the screen, heart racing. For years, I had believed the worst thing that could happen was being forgotten. I was wrong. The worst thing was being deliberately removed. And whoever thought I would accept that quietly had misunderstood me completely. Because I didn't lose my parents. I lost the illusion that my family would ever protect me the way I had protected them. And once that illusion shattered, there was nothing left to preserve. Only the truth. I didn't confront anyone for 3 days. Not my aunt, not my cousin, not the attorney. I stayed quiet on purpose. Silence has a way of making other people careless. Instead, I did what I'd learned to do best over the years. I gathered facts. Slowly, methodically, without announcing myself, I requested my father's medical records from the hospital, where he'd been admitted the week the trust was signed. It took paperwork, signatures, and patience, but grief has a way of granting access when time has passed. The records told a story no one wanted told. He had been diagnosed with acute stress disorder, severe dehydration, confusion noted multiple times by nursing staff, medication administered for anxiety and sleep. On the same day the trust documents were signed, his chart included a note. Patient appears disoriented, requires assistance answering questions. I sat back in my chair and felt something inside me harden. Not anger. Resolve. I forwarded the records to the attorney with a short message. "Please advise." His reply came the next morning. "This raises serious questions about capacity and about who benefited." I didn't need him to say the rest. I already knew. The next step was my cousin Mark. Mark and I had grown up close in age. Summers at the same lake, shared holidays. The kind of relationship that looks solid from the outside, but rests on quiet competition. He worked locally, never left town, never took risks, always presented himself as the loyal one. I called him that afternoon. He sounded surprised, then cautious. "Hey, Linda," he said. "Everything okay?" "No," I replied, "but I think you know that." A pause. "Aunt Carol said you were upset," he said carefully. "She would," I replied. "Did you know I was excluded from the trust?" He exhaled. "I didn't make those decisions. You benefited from them," I said. "That's not fair," he snapped. "I was there, you weren't." "I was paying bills," I said. "I was flying in monthly. I was managing Dad's insurance." "But you didn't live here," he replied. "You don't understand how things really were." There it was again. Presence defined by geography. "Did you know Dad was medicated when the trust was signed?" I asked. Silence. Longer than before. "I didn't ask," he said finally. Because you didn't want the answer, I replied. He sighed. What do you want from me? The truth, I said. Did Aunt Carol tell you this would cut me out? Yes, he admitted. But she said it was temporary, that you'd be taken care of later. Later. The word people use when they want you to stop asking questions. And you believed her, I said. I wanted to, he replied quietly. I thanked him for his honesty and ended the call. That conversation told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't an accident. It was a decision. And decisions have consequences. The attorney advised caution but didn't discourage action. If we pursue this, he said, it will be ugly. Families don't like being confronted with paper trails. I'm not doing this to punish them, I replied. I'm doing it to correct the record. That's rarely how they'll see it, he warned. I can live with that, I said. We filed a formal request to review the trust's validity based on potential undue influence and lack of capacity. The notice went out quietly. No accusations, no threats, just a legal question. The response was immediate. My aunt called me that night. Her voice was no longer calm. You had no right, she said, dragging this into the open. I didn't drag it anywhere, I replied. I followed it. You're humiliating us, she snapped. Your father would be ashamed. I closed my eyes. Don't speak for him. You're doing this for money, she said bitterly. No, I replied. I'm doing this because you erased me. She laughed sharply. You always were dramatic. That's what people say, I replied, when they don't like being exposed. She hung up. The next morning, Mark texted me. This is getting serious. I replied with 3 words. It already was. Over the next week, pieces started falling into place. The attorney uncovered inconsistencies in the filing dates, a witness signature that didn't match employment records, a notary who had been working part-time and couldn't confirm the circumstances. Nothing illegal on its own. But together they painted a picture. Pressure, timing, opportunity. The kind of picture courts take seriously. Word spread quickly through the family. An uncle called, then a cousin I barely knew. Some were curious. Some were angry. Some were suddenly concerned about fairness. I didn't explain. I didn't defend. I let the facts exist. That was harder for them than any argument. One evening, as I sat at my kitchen table reviewing notes, I found myself thinking about my mother, about how she would have handled this. She had been quiet but perceptive, the kind of woman who noticed patterns long before others named them. She would have told me to be careful. She would have told me not to rush. But she also would have told me not to disappear. The hearing was scheduled for early fall. Not a trial, a review, a chance to ask whether the trust truly reflected my father's intent. That was all I wanted. The night before the official notice went public, I stood on my balcony listening to the ocean in the distance. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about refusing to accept a rewritten version of my life. And once you stop accepting lies told in the name of peace, the truth has a way of stepping forward on its own, whether anyone is ready for it or not. The letter from the probate court arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, folded neatly inside an envelope that looked far too ordinary for something that was about to detonate my family. Notice of review hearing. Black ink, neutral language, no accusations, no drama. Just a date, a time, and a list of names. Mine was on it. So was my aunt's and my cousin Mark's. I read it twice before setting it down on the kitchen counter and walking away. I needed distance from the paper to breathe, to remember that this was real, and not something my grief-addled mind had invented. Within an hour, my phone started ringing. I didn't answer. By evening, the messages had stacked up. From my aunt first, long, furious, accusing me of betrayal, greed, and cruelty in the same breath. From Mark shorter, anxious, asking what I was hoping to gain, suggesting we talk this out privately. From an uncle I barely spoke to anymore, reminding me that family business should stay in the family. I turned my phone face down and made myself dinner. That felt important. Not reacting was the first boundary I'd ever drawn that wasn't accompanied by an apology. The next morning, my attorney called. They're scrambling, he said, which means they're scared. Of losing money, I asked. Of losing control, he replied. Money is just the symbol. He explained what the hearing would look like. Not a courtroom showdown, a review of documents, medical records, testimony about circumstances and intent. It won't be emotional, he said, but they'll try to make it emotional. I almost laughed. Emotion had always been their currency. That afternoon, my aunt showed up at my apartment unannounced. I saw her through this peephole and considered not answering. But something in me wanted to look her in the eye, now that the truth was no longer theoretical. I opened the door. She stepped inside without waiting to be invited, eyes scanning the room like she was searching for evidence of greed. Luxury, something she could point to and say, see, this is why. She found nothing. You've gone too far, she said immediately. I followed the facts, I replied. You humiliated your father's memory, she snapped, dragging his name into court. I kept my voice level. You dragged him into a bank when he was medicated. Her face flushed. He agreed to it. He wasn't capable of informed consent, I said, and you knew it. She scoffed. You think you're some kind of hero? No, I said, I think I was erased. She leaned forward. You live comfortably. You don't need the house. Mark does. There it was again. Need as justification, as moral high ground. My need doesn't determine my worth, I said. And Mark's convenience doesn't erase my existence. Her eyes narrowed. If this goes to court, we'll all look bad. Then you should have thought of that, I replied, before you rewrote the family. She stared at me stunned. You always were ungrateful, she said. I opened the door. We're done here. She left without another word. That night Mark called again. His tone was different this time, less defensive, more resigned. She's losing it, he said. Carol, she hasn't slept. That's not my responsibility, I replied. He sighed. I didn't know it would go this far. You knew enough, I said. You just chose not to ask questions. He was quiet for a moment. What do you want, Linda? He asked finally. I answered without hesitation, the truth on record. That could change everything, he warned. Yes, I said, that's the point. In the days that followed, the tension rippled outward. Friends of the family stopped liking my posts. Invitations went quiet. People chose sides without ever asking what had actually happened. I let them. The hearing preparation became my focus. Medical records were submitted, bank statements reviewed, emails examined. The attorney flagged discrepancies that no one had bothered to explain before because no one thought they'd be challenged. One detail stood out. The notary listed on the trust document had notarized 5 other documents that same day in 3 different locations. Impossible without teleportation. When my attorney told me that I felt something shift, this wasn't just influence. This was fabrication. Does Mark know this, I asked? Not yet, he replied. But he will. I didn't sleep much that week. Not from fear, from clarity. Every memory sharpened. The way my aunt answered questions for my father, the way she intercepted mail, the way she insisted I didn't need to see certain papers because she was handling it. I realized then how carefully the narrative had been managed, how often I'd been reassured just enough to stop asking. The night before the hearing, my cousin Mark texted me. I don't think she told me everything. I stared at the message. Then I replied, neither did my father. The morning of the hearing dawned gray and heavy. I dressed simply. No jewelry, no statement pieces. I wasn't there to perform grief or righteousness. I was there to be counted. As I walked into the building, I saw my aunt sitting stiffly on a bench, hands clenched in her lap. Mark stood nearby, pale and silent. For the first time, no one spoke to me like I was invisible. They watched me, and in their eyes I saw it. Not anger, fear. Because the truth had finally reached a place where it couldn't be redirected, minimized, or buried under family loyalty. It would be written down, and once written, it could no longer be denied. The hearing room was smaller than I expected. No raised benches, no jury box. Just a long table, a few chairs, and a court officer who looked bored in the way people do when they've seen too many families implode to be surprised anymore. My attorney sat beside me, calm, prepared, flipping through a thin folder, like this was just another Tuesday. Across the room, my aunt sat, rigid hands folded so tightly her knuckles were white. Mark sat a chair away from her, eyes fixed on the floor. The clerk called the case. Names were read aloud. When mine was spoken, something inside me steadied. I wasn't an observer anymore. I was part of the record. The judge entered and took her seat without ceremony. A woman in her early 60s, sharp eyes, no wasted motion. She got straight to it. This review concerns the validity of the Harper Family Trust, she said. Specifically, whether it reflects the intent and capacity of the grantor at the time of execution. She looked directly at my aunt. Ms. Harper, you were present when these documents were signed. Yes, my aunt said quickly. I was helping my brother. Helping how, the judge asked. My aunt hesitated just long enough. He was grieving, she said, overwhelmed. I assisted with logistics. The judge nodded once. And were you aware of his medical condition at the time? Yes, my aunt replied, but he was lucid. My attorney stood. Your Honor, he said calmly, we have medical records indicating otherwise. He passed copies forward. The judge read silently, slowly. The room felt suspended. These notes indicate confusion, the judge said. Disorientation. Medication for anxiety and sleep. She looked up. Ms. Harper, were you aware your brother had been noted as disoriented on the day the trust was signed? My aunt's voice wavered. I didn't read his chart. But you took him to the bank, the judge said. Yes. And you were listed as executor and primary beneficiary. Yes. The judge leaned back slightly. Please explain why the grantor's only child was excluded. The question landed heavy. My aunt opened her mouth, then closed it. Finally, she said Linda didn't need it. A murmur rippled through the room. The judge's expression didn't change. Need, she said evenly, is not a legal standard. She turned to Mark. Mr. Harper, were you aware your cousin was excluded from the trust? Mark swallowed. Yes. And did you know your uncle's medical condition at the time? I knew he wasn't well, Mark admitted. But I trusted my mother. The judge nodded slowly. Trust, she said almost to herself, often misplaced. My attorney stood again. Your Honor, we also have concerns regarding the notarization. He handed over another document. The judge's brow furrowed as she read. This notary appears to have been in multiple locations on the same day. My aunt's face drained of color. That's impossible, the judge said flatly. The room went completely silent. The judge set the papers down and looked directly at my aunt. Ms. Harper, she said this court takes undue influence very seriously, and what I'm seeing raises substantial concern. My aunt's composure finally cracked. I was trying to protect the family, she said, her voice breaking. Someone had to make decisions. The judge's voice remained steady. You do not protect a family by erasing a child. Something in my chest loosened at that sentence. Not triumph. Recognition. The judge ordered a temporary suspension of the trust's current terms, pending further review. Assets frozen. No changes allowed. Independent evaluation ordered. This trust will not move forward as written until this matter is resolved, she said. She looked at me. Ms. Harper, you will be included in all proceedings. Included. The word echoed. The hearing ended quietly. No gavel slam, no dramatic exit. Just paperwork and instructions. Outside the room, my aunt collapsed into a chair, trembling. Mark stood nearby, stunned, staring at the floor like it might open and swallow him. I stepped into the hallway and breathed. Deeply. My attorney joined me. This is significant, he said. The court is taking this very seriously. I didn't come for punishment, I replied. He nodded. You came for correction. As I walked toward the exit, Mark caught up with me. I didn't know, he said, his voice low. Not all of it. I believe you, I replied. But believing doesn't undo benefiting. He nodded slowly. I understand that now. My aunt didn't approach me. She couldn't. The narrative she'd built for years had collapsed under simple scrutiny. Outside, the sky had cleared. Sunlight broke through the clouds in a way that felt almost cruel in its normalcy. Life didn't stop for family drama. It just kept going. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with messages from relatives who had already heard. Questions, reactions, panic? I didn't answer. Not yet. Because this wasn't about managing fallout. It was about letting the truth finish its work. And for the first time since my parents died, I felt something close to peace. Not because I'd won, but because I had finally been seen. The days after the hearing felt unreal, like walking through a familiar house after all the furniture has been quietly rearranged. Nothing looked the same, even though nothing had physically moved. The court's order went out to the bank, the county, and every party listed in the trust. Assets frozen. No transfers. No temporary solutions. No quiet fixes behind closed doors. For the first time since my parents died, no one in my family could make decisions without acknowledging I existed. That realization landed differently than I expected. It wasn't satisfying. It was sobering. My aunt stopped calling entirely. Mark texted once to say he was trying to process everything and needed space. I respected that. Space, I had learned, was where accountability either grows or withers. The rest of the family, however, had opinions. My uncle called first. You didn't have to do this publicly, he said. I didn't, I replied. I did it legally. That's not the same thing, he snapped. It is, I said, when private conversations are used to erase people. He hung up. Another relative messaged me on social media saying I was tearing the family apart over money. I stared at the words for a long time before replying. This isn't about money, it's about truth. I never heard back. At work, I kept everything normal. Meetings, deadlines, emails. My life outside the family drama became an anchor proof that my identity didn't depend on how this ended. But at night, alone in my apartment, the weight returned. Grief surfaced in waves I hadn't expected, not just for my parents, for the version of myself who had believed loyalty would be returned simply because it was given. One evening, as I was sorting through old photos, I found a picture of my father and me on the dock near the old boat. I was maybe 12, sunburned, smiling, holding a fishing rod I barely knew how to use. He had his arm around my shoulders, his smile easy. That man would not have erased me. That certainty steadied me more than any legal argument ever could. A week later, my attorney called with an update. They've requested mediation, he said. Who I asked, even though I already knew. Your aunt's counsel, he replied. They're looking for a settlement before further review. My stomach tightened. What does that mean, I asked. It means, he said carefully, they're afraid of what a deeper investigation might uncover. I thought about the notary issue, the timing, the pressure. I'm willing to listen, I said, but I'm not compromising the truth. That's wise, he replied. The mediation was scheduled for the following week. Neutral location, private conference room, No audience, no judge, just lawyers' documents and people who could no longer hide behind family language. The morning of mediation, I dressed simply again, not to look innocent, not to look powerful, to look like myself. My aunt arrived late. Mark arrived early. He looked exhausted. When our eyes met, he nodded once, not friendly, not hostile, acknowledging. The mediator, a woman with calm eyes and a voice trained to diffuse tension, laid out the ground rules. "This is not about blame," she said. "It's about resolution." My aunt scoffed quietly. Resolution meant something different to her. When it was my aunt's turn to speak, she launched into a familiar narrative. Sacrifice, proximity, responsibility. How hard it had been after my mother died. How she had stepped in when no one else would. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to, because when she finished, the mediator turned to me. "Ms. Harper," she said, "what are you seeking?" I took a breath. "I want the trust corrected to reflect my father's intent," I said. "And I want acknowledgement that I was excluded without consent or transparency." My aunt laughed sharply. "So you want an apology and a payout?" I looked at her, calm, steady. "I want my name back where it belongs," I said. "Everything else can be discussed." The room went quiet. Mark spoke, then surprising everyone. "She's right," he said. "This shouldn't have happened." My aunt turned on him. "After everything I've done." "You didn't have the right," he interrupted. His voice shook, but he didn't stop. "You decided for him, for all of us." The mediator raised a hand gently, but the damage was done. The truth had come from inside the family now. That mattered. Negotiations took hours, back and forth, proposals, revisions, clarifications. By the end of the day, an agreement was drafted. The trust would be amended, properly, transparently. My name restored as beneficiary. Mark's share adjusted. My aunt removed as sole executor in favor of a neutral third party. No admission of wrongdoing, but no denial either. When I signed the agreement, my hand was steady. I wasn't winning something. I was reclaiming something. Afterward in the hallway, Mark approached me. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for going along with it." I nodded. "I know." That was all. My aunt didn't speak to me. She didn't have to. The story she'd built no longer belonged to her. As I walked out of the building, the late afternoon sun hit my face warm and grounding. For the first time since this began, I felt the future open instead of closing in. Not because everything was fixed, but because the truth had finally been allowed to exist without being negotiated away. And once the truth is written down, it has a way of protecting you, even when the people who should have done so didn't. The signed mediation agreement didn't change my life overnight. What it changed was the air. Things that had once felt heavy and unspoken were suddenly acknowledged, even if no one wanted to talk about them directly. The family didn't reunite. There were no tearful dinners or sudden confessions. Instead, there was distance. Honest distance. The trust amendment was filed within 2 weeks. Official, recorded, unambiguous. My name appeared where it should have been all along. Seeing it there did not make me emotional the way I expected. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I felt anchored, like a truth I'd been carrying alone had finally been given weight. Mark called a few days after the filing. "I moved out," he said. I paused. "From where?" "Carol's place," he replied. I needed space to think without her voice in my head. That told me more than anything else he could have said. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Not really," he admitted. "But I think that means I'm finally being honest." We talked for a while. Not about money, not about the trust, about our parents, childhood summers, the things we'd both avoided unpacking for years because doing so would have required choosing sides. When we hung up, I realized something quietly important. We were no longer pretending nothing had happened, and that was progress. My aunt stayed silent. No calls, no texts, no attempts to repair her image or reframe the narrative. That silence was not peace. It was retreat. At work, life moved forward in steady increments. My focus sharpened. The constant background tension I'd carried for years, the one that made every success feel temporary, had finally loosened its grip. I stopped anticipating crisis. That alone changed everything. One afternoon, my attorney emailed me the final confirmation. Trust amendment recorded. Independent executor assigned. Matter closed. Closed. I leaned back in my chair and let the words settle. Later that evening, I drove out to the old family house. I hadn't been there since before the hearing. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I didn't ask permission. The place looked smaller than I remembered. Weathered. Quiet. The porch steps creaked under my weight the same way they always had. I stood in the living room and let the memories surface naturally. My mother folding laundry on the couch. My father reading the paper by the window. The sound of dinner cooking while the radio played softly in the background. This house held history, but it no longer held my identity. That distinction mattered. I walked down to the dock near the water, the one from the old photo. The boat was gone now, sold years earlier. The boards were sun-bleached and cracked. I sat and watched the water move for a long time. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel victorious. I felt complete. That night my phone buzzed with a message from a relative I hadn't spoken to since the hearing. I didn't know the whole story before. I do now. I'm glad you didn't back down. I didn't reply immediately. I didn't need to. Validation, I had learned, was optional once you trusted yourself. The next week my aunt finally called. Her voice was stiff, controlled. "I hope you're satisfied," she said. "I'm at peace," I replied. "That wasn't my question," she snapped. "I know," I said, "but it's my answer." She exhaled sharply. "You've changed." "Yes," I replied, "because I had to." She paused. "You didn't have to do it this way." "I didn't have to be erased either," I said. Silence stretched between us. "I did what I thought was best," she said finally. "I believe you," I replied, and I still disagreed. She didn't argue. We ended the call without reconciliation, without hostility, just honesty. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. I stopped telling the story. Not because I was ashamed, because I no longer needed to explain myself to feel real. My life filled in around the space where family conflict used to live. I made plans without checking in, took opportunities without hesitation, built routines that belonged solely to me. One evening, as I sat on my balcony, watching the sun sink into the water, I thought about the word revenge. People might call what I did revenge. They'd be wrong. Revenge is loud. Revenge wants witnesses. What I had done was quieter. I had corrected a lie. I had reclaimed my name. And in doing so, I had stepped out of a role I never agreed to play. If you're listening to this, and you've ever been told you don't need fairness because you're doing fine, hear this clearly. Independence does not disqualify you from belonging. Strength does not make you expendable. And silence is not consent. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to disappear. After everything settled on paper, I expected relief to arrive like a wave. It didn't. Instead, it came in small, uneven breaths, the kind you only notice once you're no longer holding your lungs tight out of habit. For years, my nervous system had been calibrated to watch for sudden shifts. A call in the middle of the night, a problem that wasn't mine but would somehow become my responsibility. Even now, with the trust amended and the legal conflict closed, my body didn't immediately believe it was over. That took time. What changed first wasn't my family. It was how I moved through my own days. I stopped checking my phone compulsively. I stopped rehearsing explanations in my head. I stopped bracing for impact that never came. Mark reached out occasionally. Our conversations were careful but real. He didn't ask for reassurance anymore. He didn't ask me to smooth things over with other relatives. He was doing his own emotional accounting, and for the first time, he wasn't asking me to audit it. One evening, he admitted something quietly. "I thought staying close meant being loyal," he said. "Now I realize it mostly meant staying small." I understood that more than he knew. My aunt remained distant. That distance no longer felt like punishment. It felt like a consequence she was learning to live with. We had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and that was fine. Some relationships don't survive clarity. They were never built for it. At work, something subtle but powerful shifted. I spoke with more authority not because I was trying to prove anything, but because I no longer second-guessed myself automatically. When disagreements came up, I didn't fold. I listened. I decided. I moved on. My supervisor noticed. "You seem more grounded lately," she said during a quarterly review. "Like you're not carrying something invisible anymore." I smiled. "I'm not." That comment stayed with me, because I realized how much invisible weight I had been carrying simply to maintain an illusion of harmony elsewhere. Harmony that only existed if I stayed silent. One afternoon, while organizing old files at home, I found another envelope from my father. One I had overlooked before because it had been tucked inside a book. Inside was a single handwritten note. "Linda, if there's ever a time when people speak for me instead of listening to you, don't let that stand. You know me better than anyone." I sat on the floor with that note in my hands, tears finally coming without resistance. Not grief this time, recognition. He had trusted me, even when others didn't. That night, I slept deeply, the kind of sleep that doesn't leave you tired in the morning. A month later, the independent executor contacted me. Routine updates, neutral tone, transparency. No surprises. That predictability felt luxurious. The family grapevine quieted down after that. Stories lose their power when there's no reaction to feed on. People eventually find something else to talk about. I let them. One weekend, I took a short trip alone. No agenda, no obligation, just distance. Sitting by the water in a town where no one knew my last name, I realized something that made me laugh softly. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at my aunt, not at Mark, not even at myself. Anger had done its job. It had alerted me that something was wrong. Now it could rest. The space it left behind wasn't emptiness. It was room. Room to choose what came next without reacting to what came before. I didn't know yet what I wanted to build. But I knew this. It would be built with my full presence. Not in the margins of someone else's story. Not as an afterthought. As my own. By the time fall arrived, the story had stopped feeling like something that happened to me. It felt like something I had moved through. That distinction mattered. I didn't wake up thinking about court filings or trust language anymore. I woke up thinking about my day. Work deadlines, what I wanted for dinner, whether I'd go for a walk before sunset. Ordinary thoughts. They felt earned. The family settled into a new pattern that didn't require my constant participation. Holidays were smaller. Invitations more cautious. Some years I attended, some years I didn't. No one guilted me anymore. They'd learned it didn't work. Mark continued to rebuild his life quietly. He found a new place, took on more responsibility at work, started making decisions without asking for approval. One evening over coffee, he said something that stuck with me. I thought independence meant not needing anyone, he said. Now I think it means choosing who you let matter. I nodded. That's closer. He smiled a little sadly. I wish I'd learned that earlier. So do most people, I replied. My aunt never apologized. She didn't have to. Her absence from my life spoke clearly enough. I stopped framing her silence as loss and started recognizing it as protection. At work, I was asked to lead a new project involving multiple departments. High visibility, high stakes. The kind of role I used to accept with a knot in my stomach, already anticipating who I might disappoint. This time I accepted without hesitation. I set boundaries from the beginning, clear expectations, defined responsibilities, no rescuing, no disappearing. The project succeeded not because I carried it alone, but because I didn't. That felt like progress. One afternoon, while reviewing old emails, I came across a message from years earlier, from my aunt, sent shortly after my mother's death. Don't worry about this paperwork, I'll handle it. You focus on your job. I stared at that sentence for a long time, not with anger, with understanding. Control often disguises itself as care. That realization freed me in ways I hadn't expected. I wasn't uniquely targeted. I was simply the one who eventually refused. As the year closed, the executor sent the annual summary. Everything in order, transparent, calm. I read it once and filed it away. That more than anything told me the chapter was closing. Not slammed shut, placed gently on the shelf. I spent New Year's Eve alone that year by choice. No noise, no expectations. As midnight passed, I didn't make resolutions. I made acknowledgments. I acknowledged the cost of clarity, the courage it takes to be seen when it would be easier to stay agreeable. The quiet strength required to let relationships change without chasing them back to familiarity. I also acknowledged something else. I was no longer afraid of being misunderstood. That fear had kept me compliant for years. Losing it changed everything. On the first morning of the new year, I walked along the shoreline near my apartment. The air was cold, the water restless. I thought about my parents, about how grief opens doors for manipulation and truth at the same time, about how my father had trusted me enough to leave a warning in ink instead of a speech. I had honored that trust, not by fighting for money, by fighting for my name. And in doing so, I had learned something I wished every woman learned sooner. You do not owe silence to people who benefit from it. You do not owe compliance to keep the peace, and you do not have to disappear to belong. As I turned back toward home, the sun rising behind me, I felt something simple and solid settle into place. Whatever came next, I would meet it fully. Not as a placeholder, not as the reasonable one, but as myself. The invitation arrived in the mail, not by text or phone call, which already told me more than the words inside ever could. A thin envelope, cream paper. My name written carefully, deliberately, as if the act itself required courage. Family gathering. Sunday afternoon, Carol's house. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of what had happened. Just an assumption that time had softened everything enough for us to pretend. I placed the invitation on the kitchen counter and let it sit there for 2 days. In the past, I would have gone automatically, shown up early, brought food, smoothed the edges, absorbed the tension so others wouldn't have to feel it. This time I asked myself a different question. Do I want to be there? Not out of duty, not out of fear, not to prove anything. Just want. The answer surprised me. Yes, but differently. I decided to go on my terms. Sunday afternoon was warm, the kind of slow coastal heat that presses against your skin without apology. I arrived exactly on time, not early, not late. Cars lined the street, familiar license plates, familiar names. As I stepped onto this porch, I felt it immediately. The pause. Conversations inside shifting, someone noticing me through the window. I knocked once and waited. My aunt opened the door. She looked older, not dramatically, just worn down in a way control used to hide. "Linda," she said. "Carol," I replied. She stepped aside to let me in. No hug, no hostility, just space. The living room was full. Relatives seated carefully as if choosing positions that signaled allegiance without saying it out loud. Conversations resumed at half volume when I entered. I smiled politely and took a seat near the window. No one rushed me, no one avoided me either. That was new. Mark arrived 10 minutes later. When he saw me, he hesitated, then walked over. "I'm glad you came," he said quietly. "So am I replied. We sat together, not touching, not distant, simply present. My aunt cleared her throat from across the room. "I know things have been complicated," she said, "but I thought it was time we were all together." No one responded immediately. I watched her carefully. This was not an apology. It was a test. Would I step in and make it easier? I didn't. Eventually, an uncle nodded. Someone else changed the subject. Food was served. Plates passed. Life continued. At one point, a cousin leaned over and whispered, "That must have been hard, standing up like that." I met her eyes. It was harder staying quiet. She nodded thoughtful. Halfway through the afternoon, my aunt approached me. Her movements were stiff rehearsed. "Can we talk?" she asked. I considered it. "Yes," I said. "Here is fine." She blinked. "I meant privately." "I don't," I replied gently. She inhaled sharply, then sat across from me. "I never meant to hurt you," she said. "I was trying to keep things together." "I know," I replied. "But keeping things together shouldn't require removing someone." She looked away. "I lost control," she admitted. "After your parents died, everything felt like it was slipping." I waited. I thought if I organized it fast enough, she continued, no one would question it. There it was. Not an excuse, an explanation. "I needed to feel useful," she said quietly. I nodded. "I understand that." She looked at me, then eyes searching. "Can you forgive me?" I didn't answer right away. Forgiveness wasn't a switch. "I can accept reality," I said. "Forgiveness will take time." She nodded, absorbing that without protest. That alone told me how much had changed. The gathering ended without drama. No raised voices, no emotional climax. Just a slow dispersal. As I walked back to my car, Mark caught up with me. "You handled that well," he said. "I handled it honestly," I replied. "That's new for me." He smiled faintly. "For all of us." That night alone in my apartment, I thought about how far I'd come. Not in distance, in posture. I no longer entered rooms prepared to shrink. I no longer translated myself for comfort. I no longer accepted peace that depended on my silence. The Trust Amendment had corrected the past, but this moment proved something else. I was no longer waiting for permission. I had rewritten my role. And once you do that, even the people who once benefited from your quiet have to adjust. Not because you demand it, because you no longer make space for anything else. I thought the hardest part would be getting my name put back where it belonged. I was wrong. The hardest part was learning how to live once I no longer needed to fight for space. When conflict becomes a constant companion, it shapes you. It sharpens your instincts, teaches you to anticipate danger, trains you to speak carefully, and listen between the lines. When that conflict ends, even for the right reasons, the quiet that follows can feel disorienting. By late autumn, the legal process was fully behind us. The trust had been amended. The executor was operating independently, and the family had settled into an uneasy but stable distance. No more surprise phone calls, no more whispered updates, no more pressure disguised as concern. On paper, everything was resolved. Inside me, something else was still unfolding. One afternoon, I found myself driving toward my aunt's neighborhood without fully realizing it. Muscle memory, I realized. Years of being summoned, of showing up to explain, defend, or absorb tension had trained my body to move before my mind caught up. I turned the car around at the last intersection. That small decision felt bigger than any courtroom moment. Because this time I wasn't choosing restraint. I was choosing direction. Mark and I met for coffee a few weeks later. Neutral ground. A quiet place near the marina where the windows fogged up and no one cared who we were. He looked healthier, less tense, like someone who had finally stepped out of a shadow and wasn't sure what to do with the light yet. "I started therapy," he said, stirring his coffee without looking at me. "That's good," I replied, and I meant it. "I didn't realize how much of my life was about keeping her calm," he continued, "about being the good son." I nodded. "It's exhausting." He looked up. "I don't expect us to be close like before." "We never really were," I said gently. He smiled faintly. "No, we weren't." There was relief in admitting that. "I just wanted you to know," he said, "I'm trying to build something that isn't borrowed." I held his gaze. "I hope you do." We didn't hug when we left. We didn't promise to stay in touch. We acknowledged each other honestly. That felt healthier than any forced reconciliation. My aunt didn't reach out again, not to argue, not to apologize, not to reframe. Her silence was no longer loud. It was simply absence. An absence I learned can be peaceful when it no longer feels like a punishment. At work, I noticed how differently I showed up in meetings. I no longer softened my opinions out of habit. I didn't over-explain. I didn't apologize for taking up time. People listened, not because I demanded it, because I expected it. One evening, my supervisor pulled me aside. "There's an opportunity opening up," she said. "It would mean more responsibility, more visibility, possibly a move." The old version of me would have hesitated immediately. What if my family needs me? What if something happens? What if I'm not available? Those questions didn't come. Instead, I asked, what would the role require? She smiled. "That's exactly the right question." That night, I walked along the shoreline near my apartment, the air cool and sharp, the sound of waves steady and indifferent. I thought about how much of my life had been shaped by reacting instead of choosing. Reacting to grief, reacting to expectation, reacting to pressure disguised as love. I realized something then that made me stop walking. Justice doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives quietly when you're finally free to imagine a future without scanning the horizon for threats. A week later, the executor sent out the annual summary. Clear numbers, transparent decisions, no manipulation, no secrecy. For the first time, the family asset felt like what it was supposed to be, a responsibility, not a weapon. I closed the document and didn't feel the need to call anyone about it. That alone told me how far I'd come. I visited my parents' graves near the end of November, just before the holidays. The cemetery was quiet, leaves scattered across the grass, the air heavy with that particular stillness that comes before winter. I stood there longer than usual. "I didn't let them rewrite you," I said softly. "And I didn't let them erase me. I didn't wait for a sign or a feeling. I already had what I needed." As I walked back to my car, I thought about the version of myself who had walked into a lawyer's office months earlier, unaware that her entire family history had been quietly rearranged. That woman had been shocked, hurt, unprepared, but she had been brave enough to keep reading, to keep asking, to refuse the comfort of denial. And because of that, I was standing here now, not victorious, not bitter, just whole. The holidays approached without drama, no invitations, no confrontations, just space. I filled it with things that felt real. Friends, long walks, work that challenged me. Even boredom, which I'd never had the luxury to experience before. Boredom, I learned, is a sign of safety, because nothing is demanding that you disappear. As winter settled in, I understood something with clarity that surprised me. I hadn't taken anything from my family. I had taken responsibility away from people who misused it. And in doing so, I had given myself permission to live without proving I deserved to be here. That was the real inheritance. The final confirmation arrived on an ordinary morning. No phone call, no ceremony. Just an email from the independent executor written in plain language confirming that all assets had been formally restructured, recorded and secured according to the amended trust. Everything was finished. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, waiting for a surge of emotion that didn't come. Instead, I felt steady. The kind of steadiness that comes not from winning, but from no longer being afraid of losing yourself. I forwarded the email to a folder labeled "Closed" and shut my laptop. That was it. My aunt never reached out again. I heard through distant family channels that she had moved closer to her sister in another state, telling people she needed a fresh start. I didn't challenge the story. I didn't correct it. She was allowed to keep whatever version helped her sleep. Mark and I settled into something that looked like cautious respect. We met for coffee once every few months. We didn't revisit the past unless it came up naturally. When it did, we didn't argue about it. We named it, and then we moved on. "I don't think we'll ever be what we were," he said once. "No," I replied, "but we're more honest now." He nodded. "That counts." It did. At work, I was offered another opportunity, a leadership role that would require relocating within the next year. Bigger scope, bigger decisions. The old version of me would have hesitated. Who would need me if I left? What would happen if something went wrong back home? This time, those questions didn't appear. I accepted. That night, I packed away the cedar box that had held my parents' papers, my grandmother's warnings, and the story of how I learned to stop disappearing. I didn't throw it away. I placed it on a high shelf. History deserves respect. It just doesn't deserve control. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, I drove past the old family house one last time. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I looked at it through the windshield and felt no pull. No anger, no longing, no ache. Just acknowledgement. That place held my past, not my future. Later that evening, sitting alone with a cup of tea, I thought about how easily this could have gone differently. How many people stay silent because they're told speaking up will destroy the family? How many accept being erased because it's quieter than resisting? I understood now why silence is so often praised as strength. It's convenient. But silence, I learned, doesn't keep the peace. It keeps the imbalance. I didn't tear my family apart. I stopped holding it together at my own expense. And when I let go, everyone was finally forced to carry their own weight. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in my story, hear this clearly. Being independent does not make you undeserving. Being capable does not mean you should be exploited. And loving your family does not require you to vanish. The moment you step out of the role they assigned you, they will resist. Let them, because the life waiting on the other side of that resistance is quieter, stronger, and entirely yours. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more true stories about family betrayal, justice, and the quiet power of reclaiming your dignity. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't taking anything back. It's refusing to ever give yourself away again.